Lewis Burrows addressed the issue of why we should allow the marketing of organs. The way that is phrased indicates that Burrows is for the marketing of organs. So he provides a background for the reasons that he is taking the position he does. First of all, our technology and skills related to organ transplantation have really improved in the last several decades. But the number of available organs for transplant has decreased. Now, this is primarily because of increased highway safety, seatbelt laws, helmet laws, airbags, etc., the kinds of things that prevent people from dying in accidents. And because of that, fewer people are dying that are healthy and have organs that would be useful for donation and transplant. One thing that Burrows suggests is a presumed consent law. The idea behind a presumed consent law is that everyone is presumed to be an organ donor unless you specifically take an effort to opt out of doing so. And with this law in place, anyone who would be in an accident, for example, and has not opted out, you would automatically be presumed to be a donor. Illinois had a bill proposed in 2010 to pass a presumed consent law, but it failed, and I am not aware of any other attempts to do so in our state. Now, the idea behind a presumed consent law is it would increase the number of cadaveric donations. So there are two kinds of donations: the kind after someone has deceased, died in an accident primarily, that would be a cadaveric donation, or living donations. And we're actually going to spend more time talking about living donations. So first of all, the question on the flip side for Burrows is, why would we restrict monetary compensation for offering an organ for transplant? And one concern is that if you make it into a monetary issue, you take away the altruistic spirit behind organ donation, so that it seems like no longer would somebody doing this out of the goodness of their heart, but you're turning it into some monetary issue, and that takes away from the process. But Burrows argues, as a surgeon who has done transplants and has been compensated for those, that he gets paid, physicians get paid, hospitals get paid, nurses get paid, insurance, pharmaceutical companies, everyone else is getting paid who's part of the process, except the one person who's making the most personal sacrifice, the donation of the organ. So he doesn't really see that there is good reason to restrict, overall, there's no good reason to restrict compensating somebody who is an organ donor. A question that might be asked is, how much should you compensate somebody for donating an organ? And Burrows suggests something like $20,000. We do need to keep in mind that with inflation adjustment, that he might recommend more today. He also suggests that the person, besides the initial monetary compensation, should be provided medical insurance coverage and life insurance coverage, because they are going to be in a position where they are more susceptible to medical problems in the future, and potentially more likely to die earlier. So he suggests those insurances be provided. He also argues that this would actually save the company that's insuring the recipient money. If you're not going to have to pay for dialysis, then in the case of kidney donation, and that's primarily what we're going to be talking about, is kidney donation, because with kidney donation, you can be a living donor. In other words, a person can survive with just one kidney, donate the other, and it's something that they could choose and then be compensated for that. An estimated cost for dialysis in a single year is about $40,000. So if an insurance company is paying for somebody to be on dialysis, why not use some of that money instead to pay somebody else to donate a kidney. Burrows actually describes an offer he had once to perform transplants where recipients were to pay all the expenses, and the donors were going to be compensated $2,000. Both of the people would be brought in from another country, and he did refuse to do that, but he is more ready to approve these kinds of situations in the United States under certain conditions, right? Under certain restrictions. So the big question, why should we allow compensation? So these are the important reasons that Burrows suggests, right? Big picture, here we are. Why should we allow it? There are three reasons. The number one reason is autonomy. So the idea here is we're simply allowing two people who are freely choosing to be involved in the process to engage in a transaction. We have somebody who needs a kidney. We have somebody else who's willing to donate a kidney. The person needing the kidney is willing to pay, or their insurance would be willing to pay, and both people are doing what they want to do. So it's simply a matter of autonomy. Another argument that he provides is one of beneficence. So the idea here is that both the donor and the recipient would gain. Both of them have good results. This is a utilitarian argument. We have the recipient obviously benefiting. We have the donor receiving money and benefiting. So on a utilitarian basis, it seems like a proper thing to do. And third, he considers a do no harm principle. The idea is that we don't want to allow people to cause severe harm to one another. And he says, sure, there's going to be some harm done to the donor. It is extensive surgery. There are risks involved. However, with a kidney transplant, the risks are very well documented. We've been doing this for decades. We've been able to minimize these risks with proper care. And so what Burrows is arguing here is that it doesn't seem like harm is going to be done. So again, this is taking away a reason to restrict donation. Now, of these three, autonomy is by far the most significant argument. Burrows does say that there ought to be restrictions on compensating donors, and he lists four things in particular that he would not approve a donor being compensated if any of these four things were true. For example, if there was insufficient aftercare for the donor. He says the donor has to have sufficient aftercare in order for compensation to make sense. With a person living with one kidney, they're going to be vulnerable to having kidney problems. And so they're going to need, at the minimum, annual checkups to see how their kidney functions are, and possible complications might arise. He also says we should not allow this if there are going to be third-party marketers or brokers who are involved in then profiting from this process. So, for example, a company that brings two people together, a donor and a recipient, and then makes money in the process. Burrows says we should not allow that to occur. A third thing that he says should be restricted is the donor, if the donor doesn't understand the nature of the risks or is otherwise not emotionally mature enough to make the decision, the donor should not be allowed to be involved in this process. So there would need to be some assessment of both the medical understanding and an assessment, presumably by a psychologist, of the emotional maturity of the donor to make sure they are above a certain level before the process would take place. And then finally, Burrows says we would not want to allow bidding wars to occur where you might have people who are in need of a kidney upping the amount they are willing to give to a donor, and which would end up resulting in most likely the very wealthy being in a position to receive donations, but not other people. Burrows qualifies his planned process. So again, the main motivation that he has is one of autonomy, but he also thinks there are pragmatic and utilitarian benefits. So we have to qualify based on those. There need to be strict controls on the process, certainly. We are not going to allow two people to make the decisions on their own. There has to be limitations as described above to prevent the things that he was concerned about. We have to assess the donor very carefully, make sure they are physically healthy, make sure they are emotionally healthy to undergo the procedure. And the donors need that some kind of quality post-donation medical care, that they have a guarantee that they would have that. And there will be certainly a lot of short-term need for medical care, but even, as I mentioned, on the long-term side, there will be a need for care. Finally, Burrows raises some concerns about monetary compensation. So, and one of these is not necessarily Burrows, but mine, but ultimately he recognizes that his proposal might not be ideal. It does deal with the realities of the current shortage in donation organs available, and it seems to be a practical and positive step to take. So he thinks that although it's not ideal, overall, again, on a utilitarian basis, it seems to be the right thing to do. Now, here's a question that a philosopher is going to be asking, right? How far does this principle of autonomy go? So, for example, in Nevada, in certain places with restrictions, prostitution is legal. And the rationale for that is that you have two adults who are voluntarily engaging in the process, and so let the people choose what they want to do. But to take an extreme case of this, what if you had a person who was not able to support his family, has been down on his luck for years, and he decides to offer himself as a target for others to hunt him for sport? His family gets compensated $1 million, and very wealthy people, as a fictional movie might or literature might describe, would pay that much money for the thrill of hunting a person. Well, both people are engaging in the process voluntarily, but that seems like something we should definitely not make legal. Now, Burrows does raise some concerns about justice, and those concerns are related to people who might have the insurance that would cover such an operation, or even their own means to pay for the operation out of their own pocket and give the donor compensation for it. So it does seem like there's still this potential risk that those who are wealthy or in good positions would benefit more than those who are not. And so that is a concern, and we are definitely going to look at that concern in greater detail when we look at the opposing side.